I'd like to introduce to this stage Lauren from Huntsman Cancer Foundation and Wynn from Firefight Partners.
Hey, welcome. We're excited to talk to you all about donor segments, but more importantly, how to use Engagement Network's tool to really change how users interact and activate with you, your organization. Buttons are green. I got this. We started working together on the work in this presentation in terms of to solve for how to better capitalize and leverage the great campaign narrative we were getting from our fundraising agency to actually then how do we execute that effectively in Engagement Networks? Like, it's one thing to say, great, here's your 10 emails over these 5 days to these people. And it's actually a bit more complicated than that in tools like Engagement Networks because there's absolutely a lot of options of how you do that. So we came in with Hudson Cancer to kind of solve for that through some tactical strategy.
Awesome. And so before we kind of get into that case study here, I want to give you a little bit of background about where we were coming from back in 2023 here, our relationship to the platform, EN here. So reflecting on 2023, we kind of realized that we weren't using some of EN's key features to really propel our fundraising. So these included broadcasts, as well as conditional content, automations, and segments. And these marketing tools are really designed to deliver a more personalized and more efficient donor communications experience. So by not using these tools in 2023, I think we left a lot of engagement potential and revenue just kind of on the table there. We were using the more basic tools, nothing wrong there, but we were just doing business as usual, using the tools that we know how to use without really taking that leap to use these more dynamic features that EN has to offer there. Now I'm going to quantify this impact for you. So in 2023, we saw a 10-fold increase in email revenue from 2023 to 2024. And to just provide you the number there, it's not $1 to $10. So it was about $5,000 in 2023 generated total from email revenue, $5,000, not that much, right? In 2024, we saw a $53,000 email revenue there. So huge increase there. Thank you. That's, 10-fold increase there. So that was a really important metric to just kind of signal to us that our strategy was working. What we were changing from 2023 to 2024 was working. Another metric to leave you with here, a 5 times increase in revenue for every 1,000 emails sent. So in 2023, we were around about $24 generated for every 1,000 emails. Again, not very significant there. By 2024, we increased this 5 times up to about $139 generated for every 1,000 emails. So that was a significant impact for us there. All right, to give you a little bit more background as well as kind of our baseline level here in 2023, the metrics that we were looking at. So you can see we sent over 194,000 emails. That's not necessarily a small number. We have a pretty wide reach. Our donor audience is fairly large. I also like to point out that our open rates are consistently pretty high. So we sit about 30% open rate for all of our email newsletters and campaigns. And so it's not that we're not reaching people. We have that reach and we're sending out enough emails here. But then when you look at the other metrics there, the click rate and the conversion rate, those fall a little bit short. So for the conversion rate, 0.07%, that sits below the benchmark in our industry, which is about 0.09%. That's not a huge drop in that conversion rate from the industry standard, but it was something that we really wanted to kind of flag there as we're not performing in alignment with our peers. And then the click rate as well, 0.79% in 2023, that fell short of the industry standard at about 1.29%. So that's a pretty significant drop in what our peers were doing there. We were not hitting that click rate. And when you look at how many emails we sent, as well as how high our open rates are for these campaigns, that total raised, again, that 4.8 thousand is just simply not doing it for us with what we wanted to be generating in revenue and engagement. So what's the issue here? What are these metrics telling us? The problem we hypothesized was for a couple of different reasons here. The first, our quality narrative was not generating the desired revenue. And it's not that the content we were delivering itself isn't high quality. We're a small team. Our communications team at Huntsman Cancer Foundation is only 3 of us. In 2023, it was 2 of us. I was not there yet. That's probably why I underperformed. Just kidding. in 2023, there's two of us, and we put a lot of effort into our content development. We are gathering these very impactful, inspiring patient stories, research news. So our quality narrative is not necessarily the issue, but it still was not generating the desired revenue. The next portion of this problem here was that our audience logic is defined in an external CRM. So like many of you, we use another platform as well in kind of tandem with EN to really maximize the efforts there. And our audience logic largely is defined in this external CRM, meaning that requires a lot of importing, exporting, and handling massive amounts of data, putting that inside of EN, and then really working to understand how we're mapping those fields out inside of the platform, how we were using the profiles and the query tools there to really combine both of those to define our audiences. And again, because we were a small team at the time, there was very limited, I guess, bandwidth and understanding of our own limitations inside of these tools and how to make them work together efficiently. And then the third piece here, kind of already touched on this, but we knew that we weren't leveraging the marketing tools available in engaging networks, and that full capacity was not being leveraged. We were doing business as usual, and that's not always the solution. You got to try some new things here. So we hypothesized this is what the problem is. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Win here to explain how we approach this problem for 2024.
So Huntsman Cancer said, great, let's have our different agencies talk to each other. What a phenomenal idea. So we actually brought in to coordinate with the fundraising agency and do an intentional collaborative effort with Huntsman Cancer. So all three parties worked together to launch the end of year campaign. And I think this collaboration is really important. So the fundraising agency provided the end of year campaign and strategy. They were the ones, collecting the stories, identifying those audience pieces. Then we could see the gap. We could see where this great strategy didn't necessarily indicate how to use engaged networks. There's one way to know that there's a message. There's another to know how we're going to configure it, which content blocks we're going to use, what parts we're going to use, conditional content. And so Firefly came in, identified literally the tactical strategy in order to seize on that opportunity, which, as we saw earlier, did have an impact. Now, if you're like, Win, great. What does that mean in detail? Because the difference lies in the details. The fundraising agency specifically, I went back too far. Love this. Boom. Ha ha. All right. The fundraising agency handled the typical elements. So this is things like defining who the audience were, what CTA to send to them, the campaign, the creative, of those standard elements. Where Firefly came in a bit differently is we defined how to leverage engaging networks to actually achieve the desired delivery of that message, of that CTA to the people when they care. So this included things like defining the actual logic for different segments. This included things like defining an abandoned cart automation to kind of complement that journey, to allow folks to be, hey, you started but didn't finish that gift. Please give us the money, thank you very much. But also included things like when and how do you split testing? Where will that have the most visibility into value versus doing it everywhere if you're not, you want to use what you learn. But also like when do you use tokens? When do you use conditional content? Across the board, defining that in an execution level detail so that when we gave it to Lauren, she could actually do something with it.
All right, and that's where Huntsman Cancer Foundation comes back in. So we have Firefly partners here working with us, as well as our fundraising agency. We're taking that creative direction from this agency, and then we're kind of merging it together with this tactical strategy, that logic, that definition that Firefly has handed to us, those kind of guidelines. We're taking that valuable learning from these partners to implement our end of year strategy here to make it that a successful campaign. And so again, back to our team of 3 at Huntsman Cancer Foundation. My role specifically, I'm in charge of our digital communications, especially inside of EN. So kind of the champion there. And so it was up to me to really take this information from both partners, merge it together, and then build the actual campaign inside of Engaging Network. So that first started with building those segments based on the definitions and those guidelines. So thinking about, for instance, if it's a lapsed donor, how are we defining that? Where is the cutoff? Is it 6 months? Is it beyond that? Taking those filters, applying it based on these definitions handed to us by our partner, building it in the segment tool, which as a newbie at the time, I've only been in there for about a year or so. Big fan of segments. When I've tried to use the other tools, profiles, queries, big fan of segments. I like the visual aspect of it. You can also do the kind of more listed view there. Great organization inside there. So I actually built those segments based on those definitions. Then the next piece of this puzzle, of course, was opening up the broadcast tool, putting those segments to work inside of there, and making sure that this creative campaign handed to us from the agency was really interpreted well into these different HTML blocks inside the broadcast tool. I would also like to mention I was an HTML newbie, and so that was quite the experience to learn HTML kind of on my own there. But I will say it was made very easy with this kind of visual element of broadcasts and using those blocks. It's also great that Engaging Networks has those kind of sample blocks for you to kick off of. And so that made it a really easy process for me to be able to take a look at this creative that we were handed by our agency and then map it inside the tool to actually build it and use these unique blocks to achieve that. And then finally, of course, once these segments are built and have the broadcast there built as well, applying those segments using conditionalized content. So that's very easy, again, with inside the broadcast tool itself. It's just something you can toggle on and off. You choose which segments you want to be targeting there. And then if you're changing a couple sentences or maybe you're changing the image, you can deliver those specific components to each specific segment there. So that's kind of how I took the learning from both valuable partners in our effort here to create an end of year campaign. So I mixed that creative strategy with Firefly's tactical strategy, which Wynn is going to explain. What does that mean?
I will. But first, I want to brag that something that you did that I think there's two things that you did that were particularly helpful. One is you chose what to ignore from both agencies. And I say this,
Yes.
this because it is not uncommon that if you're in the nonprofit, your plate is full. So at some point, you have to make choices about what you prioritize. And your choices, I think you dropped the split testing. Great. But what you kept was the focus on really personalizing the user experience when and where you could based on what you had at your disposal. And so I want to call it out because I think it's like easy to be like, great, do all these perfect things and be perfect. That's not realistic. But it's about knowing what to prioritize when you're making those changes. So I know that we've said this word tactical, okay, 2 words, tactical strategy. I just want to be clear, when we use this word, what we're talking about is the literal technical definition of how to leverage platforms. So this is like often we're told, please send this to your lapsed donors who give between this range and this range. Anyone who's been in any platform knows that there's many ways to define date range, many ways to define what counts as a gift. All of those things impact who is included and who is excluded. And so when we talk about tactical strategy, we are defining all of the technical, detailed information that will allow someone to actually implement the desired campaign for the desired effect. But why bother? Like, okay, great, Win, that's dope. Love that you can be detailed in logic. My staff can do that. And that's true. But here's what we've noticed in working with this, both with Hunts Cancer, but also with other clients, is that this step has shown to develop more intentional segmentation for supporters. It's shown to more effectively leverage your specific platform to the best and its most capable, because each platform is a little bit different. And this approach, pausing between the great idea and then defining that tactical element, has shown that we have better success in nurturing actual relationships with our supporters. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not a transaction, but to build and nurture that relationship and then to deepen it over time. So great, but the impact numbers, I love numbers. I'm not gonna read all this, but the highlight here is that in 2023, Hunts and Cancer was below benchmark on most of your industry points of reference. In 2024, was above benchmark on most points of reference. So at revenue, 10 times, we saw that earlier. Click rate went from 0.079 to over 3.5. Benchmark is around 2.9, depending on who you look at. Love these things change. But the one that I think is important to talk about is while our revenue increase, click rate increase, we did see conversion rate go down slightly. And the reason that we're not concerned, besides there's always things to improve and do better this year, is we sent to double the audience. So to maintain this level of engagement, not just in revenue, we didn't just get a surprise $30,000 gift, but to maintain the email engagement along with the revenue increases, we see opportunity that was a lot of people not being engaged, but also not just not, but like how we talk to them changed in 2024. So cool, Huntsman Cancer had a great time. It all worked for them. Love it. But what's that mean for me in my day to day? And if you're also up here, you need to drink water. It's very good for you. So the three things that we'll talk about that we want you all to take away as you're doing this is 1, user-centric segmentation, 2, specific CTAs and calls to action, and 3, personalizing the narrative for the person you're actually sending this to. So user-centric, what this means is you are actually in your logic prioritizing the user's behavior and the user's relationship to your organization, and you're prioritizing that over donor recency information. This has been tested elsewhere, but we saw it play out here that the segmentation that prioritized user behavior and user relationship performed better than segmentation defined purely on donor recency information.
All right, and then the second key takeaway here has to do with calls to action and how those impact your donors' behavior. So, first point of discovery here, we found in our 2024 campaign after we did the analysis here. So our 2024, not 2023. 2023 was bad news. 2024 here, looking at our button links, those outperformed the simple text links by 62% in driving these unique clicks. And so that's a huge difference for something as small as just a button. And that's something we test often, is kind of how we stylize these buttons, down to what colors do we use, what shape is it. But basically this tells us that when we show our supporters this action in a very clear and concise way, such as a button, that's driving 62% more engagement there. The next point of discovery here, we discovered that number-specific calls to action generated the most engagement. So for instance, for our end of year campaign here, if we have a matching gift, those call to actions that said stuff that was more specific than just saying triple my gift, which you would think would be very powerful, right? Triple my gift performed less than saying $500 becomes $1,000 or $750 becomes $1,500. So that's a quick little takeaway I would encourage you to try as well, is to give that number specific call to action, because those worked well for us. Then that third point there is just to say generic asks consistently underperformed in our email campaigns here and generating less unique clicks than any other kind of asks. And this was quite interesting because even the links in our footers and our headers, even if they were just our logo, those outperformed those generic asks. So language that just said something like donate now or give now, that underperformed even to our header buttons. So that was an interesting point of discovery for us. But what does this mean for calls to action? For creating your call to actions here, you should be specific, you should be clear, and you should be visually distinct. That extra thought put into these calls to action will translate into better engagement, drive your revenue, and make your supporters feel a little bit more seen.
And just to plug you one more time, I think it was mentioned in the first presentation, but actually taking the time to name your links, not just drop the link in, is going to be the difference in you being able to use the new reporting tools from Engagement Networks to see which ones are working and to what degree. So as you do this in the next year, next campaign, that little bit of effort that you took in execution meant that you guys could learn from what you did to improve the next time.
Awesome. Then this last takeaway here, I'll go quickly. I know we're right at time, but that's to personalize the narrative here. This is what we've learned. So that first portion, you're going to want to customize your copy to speak directly to the relationship this specific segment or specific donor has to your organization. So for instance, for our most loyal or longtime supporters, we're going to convey messaging that indicates how their consistent support through time has made an impact for our organization. In that same vein, for stewardship messaging, you want to lean heavily into how they've impacted your mission. So for instance, for again, our most loyal supporters, we might want to deliver them to high impact research statistics, or how they might have helped fund a clinical trial, or a patient that their donation helped receive care. So by delivering that stewardship messaging and helping them connect directly to their impact and their work for our mission, that is a really personable thing to do that will improve the outcomes here. And the industry actually indicates that personalization can lead to up to a 60% increase in your revenue. So it's not just all for fun, as Wynn said, this has meaningful impact there. And again, just to call out the conditional content tool in engaging networks, this is super simple to do right inside your broadcast or email classic even. Toggle between them, deliver different messages to your supporters. And then finally, the 3 things that you can implement now, just to sum them up again, that user-centric segmentation. So go ahead and create your segments based on that user behavior, the relationship to your organization. Again, a highly customizable tool, plenty of filters to choose from, and the organization inside that tool is great as well to keep those solidified there. The next portion here is to test that link type and copy. We've shared a little bit about how testing buttons and our calls to actions have had huge impacts for us. So I encourage you to do the same. And as Wynn mentioned, and as well as other folks here today, name those links to be very unique, descriptive. So for in our newsletters, if we have multiple buttons, for instance, I'll always be sure to say top button, bottom button, middle button, just so I know which button was actually clicked on there. So that's very important when you're testing your different links and copy. Then finally, that personalized narrative. I really encourage you to leverage the conditional content tool, especially because in the reporting stage in the broadcast, after you've used that and set up distinct segments, you can tell which segments were performing the highest within the same email. I'll also leave another tip here. Even if you aren't changing any copy or changing anything about the email for these different segments, still go ahead and create that conditional content and apply those segments, because then you'll still be able to see how they performed, even if you didn't change the copy. It's a great tool for reporting there.
You can also use the reporting tool to layer that on and pull it out later.
Plug for the reporting tool, use that now.
But that's really what we want to talk about, is that the role of personalization and how we use tactical strategy to actually achieve that for y'all's success. If y'all have questions after, because we're past time, feel free to grab either one of us. Happy to talk about both what we did, but also what we learned to do different this year, which is what I love, because I love iterating. But otherwise, thank you all for your time and attention, and appreciate it.